Good afternoon. This week we are discussing Parshat Tazria Metora, double portion. There's a bunch of them to come. And I've entitled this Finding Levels of Meaning in Difficult Teachings. I'll be going through various scholars and academics and to try to get a handle on how we can frame these Parashot. So we begin talking about when there is a mum, when there is a bright spot, a scab arising, it becomes leprosy on one's skin, and how one is brought to Aaron or to one of the other Kohanim. They will look upon the plague of the skin of the flesh, and if the hair has turned white and the appearance of the plague is deeper than the skin of the flesh, it is in fact what is called tzara'at. Whether or not we want to accept that tzara'at is what we know as leprosy, that's another discussion. It involves some medical texts and resources, and I have spoken about that in the past. However, we're going to just focus on what is going on in these texts regarding purity, and that will be the focus of this discussion this year. Earlier, in the very beginning of our Parsha, and by the way, after this presentation in Vayikra, Parek Yud Gimel 13, we go on and give many details. But before that, we read Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe le'mor daber b'nei Yisrael le'mor isha ki tazria v'yalda zachar tuma shivat yamim ki met me nidat dotet tetameh. A woman conceives, gives birth to a male child. She becomes ritually tameh, impure, not the same as dirty, not the same as to be avoided, but tameh with very specific contours in terms of what that means for 7 days. And she will observe those days as one does with the menstrual flow. On the 8th day, vayom hashmini yimo b'sar aralo, arlato. On the 8th day, the child will be circumcised. And then for 33 days, she remains in a transitional state during which she may not touch any consecrated food, enter the sanctuary until her days of purification have been completed, ad milot yemei tahara. If she gives birth to a female child, then she remains in that state of tame'ah for 2 weeks. She remains in the transitional state for 66 days, so basically double. When the period of her purification has been completed, whether for a son or a daughter, and we go on to talk about the offerings that she brings. So the question is, what do we do with these texts? And the often excruciating details found in this double portion, speaking of various levels of tum'ah that would ultimately result in exclusion from the communal observances, something we have already found to be painful often enough. If there is any doubt about this exclusion, the end of our double parsha is quite clear. V'hizartam et b'nei Yisrael mitumatam v'lo yamutu b'tumatam b'tum'ah et mishkani asher b'tocham. You must separate the Israelites from their ritually defiled state so that they may not die on account of that defiled state by defiling my sanctuary. This is the law pertaining to a man who has an abnormal discharge, a seminal discharge, or any ritualistically impure discharge that occurs. And it applies also to a menstruate. It applies also to one who has given birth. So, giving birth, it's a wonderful experience, and yet this is what we've got. How do we make sense of this and not feel less positive regarding ourselves and our state of being? First of all, let's understand the difference between purity and impurity versus cleanliness and uncleanliness. Purity is something perhaps best understood as a state of being, emotional, psychological, as well as physical, that is to be attained. It is the condition or the quality of being pure, freedom from anything that would in any way contaminate or pollute. For example, the purity of drinking water, freedom from any admixture or modifying addition, ceremonial or ritual cleanliness. Unclean, by contrast, means dirty, filthy, morally or spiritually unfit, infected with a harmful supernatural contagion, prohibited by ritual law for use or contact. This may be seen as more of a physical state, while when we use the words of tum'ah and tahara, we're talking about a spiritual state. Clearly, these two notions of being impure and unclean are not always mutually exclusive of each other, but I would suggest that differentiating between them does indicate some abstract notion that is worthy of trying to understand. We should not conflate them as one. They actually mean different things. As an imperfect example, consider that while kosher spaces must have a certain level of purity in terms of ingredients and food prepared and served, unfortunately, and some of us will chuckle at this, sadly, they're not always as clean as we would like. So, let's consider some different attempts at making sense of the purity that is being put forth in our text this week, and how we can see this in a manner that is not depressingly negative. So I'm going to share different perspectives on how we can approach this. The first one is Rabbi Bernie Fox of the OU, who says tzarat, going back to the idea of leprosy and its connection with impurity, can be avoided by proper behavior and approval of God. He teaches, the entire discussion of tzarat in these sections of Tazria and Metora evokes a sense of the surreal. The Torah describes unfamiliar afflictions that can extend to clothing, to the house, to other physical places. The afflictions are treated like contagious diseases. The afflicted person is subjected to isolation. The cloth or other vessel or home that is impacted is destroyed. We cannot help but wonder, what is this strange disease that is described by the Torah? What are its causes? Why does this affliction evoke such an intense and extreme response? The Torah does not provide any help for us to make sense of these laws. No mention is given of the cause of the affliction, and this omission leaves the reader with a sense of confusion and just feeling lost. Of course, when the patient reader discovers the cause of this affliction, the laws become intelligible. The affliction is seen as a divine punishment. The punishment begins by striking the house. If the person repents, then the afflictions proceed no further. If the person persists, tale-bearing, improper use of language, whatever, the affliction persists, moving from the person's clothing to the body. The consequence of isolation makes sense in this dynamic, as our sages have explained that tale-bearer, the one who gossips, has caused others to be ostracized by the community. Therefore, he deserves the same ostracization, the same isolation that he has brought upon his victim. This, of course, comes to us from the text about Miriam when she speaks against Moshe. So here's a cause and effect relationship that is suggested with an external consequence. Avoid the aberrant behavior and the condition that renders one impure and not part of the communal observance, then is removed or is not a concern. That might be one possibility. We remove the behavior and then the condition does not obtain. So that's one possibility, according to Rabbi Fox. The second one is more internal and emotional than in terms of the impact on individuals by our actions. And it is from a text called The Power of Shame by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, alav shalom. He tells the story. On the 20th of December 2013, a young woman, Justine Sacco, was waiting in Heathrow Airport before boarding a flight to Africa. To while away the time, she sent in a tweet in questionable taste about the hazards of catching AIDS. There was no immediate response, and she boarded the plane unaware of the storm that was about to break. 11 hours later, on landing, she discovered that she had become an international cause célèbre. Her tweet and responses to it had gone viral. Over the next 11 days, she would be Googled more than 1 million times. She was branded a racist, she was dismissed from her job, and overnight she'd become a pariah. Rabbi Sachs goes on to explain how our new social media and the access it affords all have brought us to a return to this ancient phenomenon known as public shaming. 2 recent books, he says, John Rawson's So You've Been Publicly Shamed and Jennifer Jacquet's Is Shame Necessary, have discussed it. Some believe it's a good way, that it's a way to get public conversations to behave more responsibly. But others acknowledge the dangers. It is one thing to be shamed by a community of which you are a part, quite another by a global network of strangers who know nothing about you or the context in which your act took place. That's more like a lynch mob than pursuing justice. Either way, says Sachs, we acquire an understanding of the otherwise bewildering phenomenon of tzaraat, the condition dealt with at length in this week's Parsha. While it has been translated as leprosy, a skin disease, or scaly infection, there are formidable problems in identifying it with any known disease, and work has been done on this, which I've talked about in the past. Further, as described in the Torah, it affects not only human beings, but the walls of houses, furniture, clothes. There is no known medical condition that has this particular property. Rabbi Sachs finishes his statement, his teaching on this, by saying, the Torah is a book about holiness and correct conduct. It is not a medical text. Finally, tzaraat, as described in the Torah, is the condition that brings not sickness, but rather impurity, tum'ah. Health and purity are different things altogether. So, impure is not the same as unclean. Pure is not the same as clean. Health is not the same as purity. Others have wondered, perhaps this was nervousness, an internal reaction when one has done something they know to be wrong. That could be another explanation for tzaraat. But nervous itching and scales does not seem to satisfy the question of why the separation. What exactly are we talking about? A third voice. Rachel Barenblatt, as the Velveteen Rabbi, teaches that experiences can be extreme and that we may need healing time. She points out that we loosely translate these terms, tahara and tumah, as ritual purity and ritual impurity. Tumah is conveyed by childbirth, by eruptive skin conditions, menstruation. Though garments and houses can be afflicted too, not just human beings. I've thought of this, by the way, in terms of those of us that have ever had to deal with mold in our houses. And the impact. I'm very allergic these days, so that's what you're hearing. But the impact on us, we can get sick from the walls of our houses. This is possible. That's not what we're talking about here. Rachel Barenblatt goes on and explains, I used to find it almost impossible to connect with this part of the Torah. But she then talks about how she joined her shul's KEDUSHA, the Volunteer Burial Society, and did an extended unit of CPE. Those experiences offered her a path to Torah portions like this. She explains, when I've spent a night ministering to a family in crisis, children of a parent unexpectedly dead of an aneurysm, parents of a child incapacitated by a skiing accident, spouse of someone who is dying or who is already gone, I come away feeling the same kind of wired exhaustion that arose after my first time serving on the KEDUSHA. Dealing with sickness and death leaves me a little dizzied, a little fried, as though I stuck my metaphysical finger into a socket and got charged up with energy that I can't quite describe. It's not a bad feeling exactly, but it's not a comfortable one. It's the spiritual equivalent of looking directly into the sun. I come away with my vision temporarily blurred. I think that's what Tuma is about. Here, in this dynamic, the experience is too much. The sun is too bright, and one has to withdraw to recover and reboot, if you will. There's a book by Anita Diamond called The Red Tent, for those of you that are familiar with it. And it talks about how women stay together during their menstrual periods and how they support each other and how they withdraw from public society, but they create their own society. And think about giving birth. You're exhausted. Think about Shiva after someone dies and people come to do Nichum Avlim, comforting the mourners, and yet maybe sometimes the mourner just has to be alone. How do we square all of this? What is the calculus that allows us to bring all these elements together? A fourth voice. Menachem Mendel of Kotzker Rav poses what may seem to many to be the obvious question here. He says, why does a woman become Tame'ah after she has given birth? The purest action we as human beings can do. He quotes the Gemara in Ta'anit 2a. Rabbi Yochanan said there are 3 keys in the hand of God that are not entrusted to an agent. They are the key of rain, the key of conception and childbirth, and the key of revival of the dead. Noting that giving birth is one of the 3 keys, which stay exclusively in the hands of Hashem and are not entrusted to an emissary. When a woman is giving birth, she has a special heightened level of KEDUSHA accompanying her. Once the baby comes out and the birth process has ended, the giving birth KEDUSHA goes away. And the Tumah, the impurity that is there for the Kotzker, and listen carefully, is a void of the extra KEDUSHA. Having gone through the experience, one reaches that level of spiritual heights that is then taken away. This, says the Kotzker Rab, is also why there is Tum'ah from involvement with a corpse, with someone who is nifter, who has died. This goes back to Rachel Barenblatt's idea or observation as being part of the Chevra Kadisha. The Kotzker teaches when the neshama takes leave, the neshama leaves our body, the neshama leaves this world. It leaves behind a void of Kedusha. So we have to get it back. We have to work towards reclaiming it. Here, we're talking about a heightened state of being that is not able to be maintained. This is rising to the higher limits of the life scale, not lowering oneself due to what is done. For our 5th and last perspective, we will return to Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Shalom, who will help us to navigate the difference between looking at these explanations of external reasoning, internal feeling, or the notion that the light is just too bright and one needs to recover, to withdraw from it for a bit. He teaches. The anthropologist Ruth Benedict, in her book about Japanese culture, The Chrysanthemum and the Sword, popularized the distinction between 2 kinds of society, guilt cultures and shame cultures. Ancient Greece, like Japan, was a shame culture. Judaism and the religions influenced by it, most obviously Calvinism, were guilt cultures. The differences between them are substantial. In shame culture, what matters is the judgment of others. Acting morally means conforming to public rules, and expectations. You do what other people expect you to do. You follow society's conventions. If you fail to do so, society punishes you by subjecting you to shame, ridicule, disapproval, humiliation, and ostracism. In guilt cultures, what matters is not what other people think of you, but what your voice of consciousness tells you. Living morally in a guilt culture means acting in accordance with the internalized moral imperatives, you shall and you shall not. You know, to be right and wrong. People in shame cultures are external, other-directed. They care about how they appear in the eyes of others, about their image. People in guilt cultures are inner-directed. They can share what they know about themselves in moments of absolute honesty. Even if your public image is undamaged, you know you have done wrong. Shame is public. Guilt is inner torment. We as Jews have an interesting challenge because community is everything. We do care what others think about us. However, ultimately, what also defines us as Jews is each and every person's singular relationship with Rabbano Shalom. Therefore, we are intrinsically directed while externally aware. So we hold ourselves to our own standards and then come to community to be our best selves, both individually and collectively. Purity is a matter of the mind, the soul, the spirit, the body. Our Parsha interlaces this notion with the reality of the human experience, personal events, personal consequences, personal elevations in one's sense and presence of KEDUSHA. We will be impacted by the lows of disease. We will experience the highs of childbirth. We will be subjected to actions that may result in illness, even separation. That being said, we can and we do always return to our more even sense of being, suitable for communal participation, involvement, and inclusion, where that sun is not absent, nor is it too bright, but just enough to warm, to comfort, to embrace our individual beings, as well as the community of which we are part. Remember that separation in these instances is only until the person heals, whether it be on a physical level, an emotional level, a psychological level, or any combination of the above. Our goal is to be in community. Our means of doing that is to stay as pure and as inner-directed as we possibly can. Shabbat Shalom to all, and Yom HaAtzmaut Sameach.